Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the invite. It's good to come up and share learnings. I guess that's what it's all about in this world, is to share what we learn and hope we don't see the same thing happen again. So yeah, my role in the incident, I got a call at 8 a.m. on Saturday, the 6th of September 2014, to say there's been an explosion. We didn't know at that stage what stage the casualties were in, and basically get in the car and off you go. So I spent 10 days at Charleville. Never been there before and enjoyed my time in Charleville, but certainly not at the scene. It's a fair bit of work there for 10 days, and I'll run through a little bit. Going to give a bit of a snapshot really through the incident. If we just go on to the introduction slide, just go through a little bit of the incident. Before that, I'll give you a bit of the role of who we are and what we do, for those that may not be familiar with our gamut and what we do in the world of explosives and emergency response. Just jump on to the next one. Run through the overview of the incident. Just got a video there just showing you really what happened. Run through the investigation, what we found from the almost 2-year investigation that we ran, the recommendations and the implementation of those recommendations, and where we're at, and how that applies to emergency response. Broader context of emergency response, but also in your applications as well. It's certainly stuff that can be taken back everywhere. So, what do we do? Our role in the inspectorate in DNRM. You would have had Lionel here yesterday from the Mines Inspectorate talking about investigation stuff as well. So we are part of the same group as the Mines Inspectorate. We do a lot of work on mines, we do stuff outside of. So in essence, our role with explosives is from cradle to grave for all explosives in Queensland. So you've seen the airbag issues in New South Wales recently. We deal with airbags and we regulate airbags, not so much the vehicle aspect and the product recall, but the explosive elements related to the airbag we deal with, and having to respond and work out the progress and program for that. So we cover the whole gamut, from fireworks through to mining explosives through to anything that is energetic and falls under our scope of regulation. So that's who we are and what we do. Most of our work is trying to be proactive. In Queensland, I think we do that role fairly well in trying to get out into industry, get out onto the sites. We've got staff around the regions of Queensland, in Mount Isa, Townsville, Mackay, Rockhampton, and down south here as well. So that's part of our role, is about 15 to 16 inspectors in the state for explosives, and we do a lot of work in those areas. So that's who we are, that's what we do. My role, I'm in Brisbane, so I do a lot of technical work, and certainly still rolling on from Angela Creek and trying to roll out the implementation to make sure we get that to stick, because I certainly don't want to see another ammonium nitrate truck have a fire and an explosion ever again. So, as I talked about, we try to be proactive in the way that we regulate, the way that we, especially for something explosives, high risk areas that we work in, we don't want the incident to happen. So, for those familiar with the Swiss cheese model, we try to put in all these layers of protection, not just have to go through them all, but making sure that we've got people who are trained and competent, that we've got systems in place on sites and with people working, that we as a regulator have that oversight to see what's out there. Our aim is to work and trying to get the best outcome. Safety and security is what our focus is the same as everyone on site. So we want to make sure that we try and prevent those those holes in Swiss cheese lining up to lead to an event. So that's a little bit about us, and more than happy I'll be around here till lunch, so I'm more than happy to have a chat to people in the break about what we do and more around the incident or other things with explosives. But just run through a little bit of what our typical role is. So as the inspectorate, our main role is to enforce the regulation, but we also get involved in the emergency response aspects. So our main role in an incident is to provide advice to emergency services typically. So depending on who's in control of the site, if it's a crash or a fire or so forth, we would be providing advice initially to police or to Queensland Fire Emergency Services. Purely of a technical nature, and then also we are the conduit between the transport company that we may license or the consigner of the goods, the explosives manufacturer or supplier. So we would make sure that those people are at that, if they're not already at the scene, are involved as quickly as possible or providing the technical advice for their particular product. That's our usual role. Typically after the incident,
September 5th,
once it's all been cleaned up
a road train carrying 52 tonnes of ammonium nitrate was involved in a single vehicle accident.
We have two means. We can either take over the site
and
we would control the site,
approximately 30 kilometres south of Charleville in Queensland, Australia. The truck was travelling in a southerly direction on a clear night in a remote
that typically
area
works quite
when it
well
left the road.
On a
it came to rest in a creek
mine
bed
site
adjacent to a road bridge and in close proximity to a disused rail bridge.
There's a fence around it.
During the crash, bags of ammonium
Angelo
nitrate
Creek was
and
a little
fuel
bit different.
tanks on the truck
It
ruptured,
was a remote
spilling
site,
diesel and scattering ammonium nitrate prill across
impossible
the crash
to isolate.
There was a fire on the vehicle and the driver was seriously injured, but he managed to escape the burning vehicle. A local man was first on the scene, followed by a truck driver shortly after from the south. The local man left the site and called emergency services from a nearby farm,
unique for us
as there was no mobile phone reception at the accident site.
There was a vehicle crash,
truck
so
driver
the truck
arrived
left
from
the highway.
north after the local man had left the site.
Over the initial
the two truck
control,
drivers remained with the injured
with
driver. The fire on the
chemicals
vehicle
on board,
burned for more than 1 hour before the first emergency response crew arrived.
Service responded.
Shortly after, a second fire crew arrived at the site, followed by a police car. A small explosion occurred while the responding fire crews were attending to the injured driver.
The interesting thing when you talk about emergency response is you can only deal with what you know. In this incident, when the fire is rocked up,
there were
they
no
didn't actually know that there was
the
ammonium
driver
nitrate
and
on
the
board.
7 other people at the scene sustained injuries, most of them
because of the remote site and the comms issues, and we had issues at the site as well with dead spots, even the satellites were having issues with satellite phones.
A truck parked to the south,
they
and a
didn't
police
get
car
the
parked
second
to the
call
north
in to tell them there was ammonium nitrate on board.
Damage.
So they were responding to what they
The
thought was a
sections
vehicle
of the highway
fire
were
and a
destroyed,
grass fire.
and the
So
rail
they've got
bridge
the local
sustained
council guy to bring the
major
water truck
structural
out.
damage.
They arrive on
Debris
scene,
from
and
the
you'll see with the
explosion
video,
was discovered
it
up
sort of
to
shows you
1
basically
kilometre
what
from
they
the
saw.
blast site
With
in all
nothing more than a
directions.
small grass fire.
A house,
There was
approximately
nothing
6
there
kilometres north
initially
of the
to alert
accident
them to the
site,
fact that this thing was
sustained
going to
damage
explode
to
minutes
its
later.
internal walls.
So it's really, really difficult thing. I'll show you some of that. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we'll show you some of that in a minute. So our role was really to look at, and we took the lead, dealing with the fire and the explosion. Given the depth of damage, there was very little that police could do on the vehicle crash side of things. There wasn't much left for them to actually analyse at the scene. And it was very unique for us because we actually took over control of everything. So we actually were directing police and firers and everyone else, which is not our usual role, and I don't ever want to be there again. But it was certainly a unique snapshot for us. And over those 10 days, we had up to 40, 50 people on site. And it's great in those situations because you work out who needs what. You do your analysis of who has important things that they need to do that you're in their way of, and they'll actually provide you with help. So we got a massive amount of help from Transport and Main Roads. They brought in all of their gear because their most important thing was from the community and from the government was to get the highway open again. So the Mitchell Highway is the main thoroughfare through New South Wales and that neck of the woods. Trucks are having to divert up to 400 or 500 kilometres to get around that area. So really, really good support from those guys, and really all the agencies provide a lot of support. So I'm just going to run this video here, hopefully be able to hear okay. It just gives you a quick 2-minute snapshot of the incident. So I'm not going to go into much more detail of the incident. So that video is available on our website, and a little snapshot of the actual incident and recommendations. So if you want to grab the video and show it and use it, I'm more than happy to, because it gives a real snapshot of the incident and what happened. And you saw the video there, we recreated the video based on really the witness accounts. So we had eight witnesses at the site. 5 of those were 50 metres away from that explosion when it happened. The explosion was about 10 to 15 tonnes of TNT. How they're still alive still gives me goosebumps today, given the proximity. If you were told you're going to be 50 metres away from an explosion of that size, I'd give you 0 chance of survival. We're hoping to do some more modelling to try and understand what happened, but basically the fact that the vehicle's in the creek bed, it's given them protection from the overpressure and the shrapnel, and also the way that the vehicle was sitting with the actual explosives, or the ammonium nitrate that became explosive, has carried the actual blast direction away from where the people were standing. So really quite amazing. When we went through the analysis and looked at what had happened, a minute before that major explosion, one of the fireys was actually on the bridge looking at the vehicle, trying to work out what was on board. He was looking for signs. So they knew they'd got some info from the driver. The driver actually came to as soon as they got oxygen to him. The first fire truck arrived 10 minutes before that explosion. The second fire truck arrived 2 minutes before the explosion. So they managed to get some oxygen onto him, and he told them, there's ammonium nitrate on board, you need to evacuate. The other 2 truck drivers that were standing with him basically thought he was dying. They decided to stay with him for 45 minutes watching his truck burn 50 metres away. They knew what was on board, they knew the risk, but they thought they'd stay with him, and they thought he was pretty much dead. He had 35% burns, he had a broken neck, broken bones. He actually had a massive scalp injury. They could actually see, parts of his brain underneath. They thought he was pretty much, they were there to see his last moments. How he survived is still beyond me from the traffic crash. He woke up in the cab. The cab was burning. You saw the video. That's pretty much what he described, that the cab was burning. He could only see the front windscreen was out, and he just thought, I've got to get out of here or I'm dead. So he's crawled through the fire, which has given him burns to his legs, to his torso, to his arms and his face. And he's then made his way up onto the highway when the first cars stopped. Quite interesting, that fire burnt for over an hour. There were only 3 vehicles in that hour, and they all came within the first 15 minutes of the crash. So the local guy was driving down, he saw him, stopped. Truck driver came from the south and he stopped just up here. And the truck to the north. There were no other vehicles until the fireys came an hour later. So really, really quite amazing. What we're looking at here in this scene is basically, this is from the Transport Main Roads. This is the highway. This is Mitchell Highway running south. So Charleville to the north, Cunnamulla, Wandra to the south. The truck had been driving for 13 hours that day. He'd started in Gladstone. He was basically half an hour from his park up for the night, which is the truck stop just south of this bridge before he gets to Cunnamulla. He'd done his stops on his way to Roma. He'd stopped in Charleville at the Gull service station and had his dinner and basically got himself ready for the night for his last little stint in. We didn't deal with, our focus was the crash and the explosion. There was no, police did their investigation on the crash. Couldn't find a cause of what caused the crash, so don't actually know. The only witness is the driver. He actually has no recollection from Roma until after the crash. So what happened in there and what led to that, I'm not sure. But you can see the camber of the road. Basically, the vehicle's driven off, and he's hit the end here and just travelled over the creek, and in essence, the vehicle's just gone straight across and lined up along the bridge. From the accounts of the witnesses, they could see wheels, so the trailers were basically wheels up towards the bridge, and the prime mover was sitting on the other side of the bank. The creek, from the accounts and the witness accounts and the locals, was dry. It was bone dry that time of year. It's September, so this is 5th of September 2014. Hadn't been a lot of rain, but from the transport bridge inspectors, they say there's always a body of water underneath the bridge. We didn't know that at first, but it becomes fairly important when it comes to fires and ammonium nitrate, and certainly aluminium on board the truck. That's the before. This is what we arrived to. So this is as close to the exact scene. It actually rained the day after, which was good in some ways because it put the fires out and it made sure any ammonium nitrate that was around got washed away. We still found a lot of ammonium nitrate buried, which we were able to sample. But this is basically here. This here is a doona that the guy was wrapped in 50 metres away. So over the gap there is the crater, and you'll see the crater soon. 6 metres deep, 12 metres along the length of the creek, and 6 metres across. So we were able to use the crater to do some crater analysis to try and understand the size of the explosion, and actually analysis of craters is a bit iffy, but it came up pretty close to what we expected the final explosion was. So we're able to get some quick data out of understanding the size of the explosion. So we had the driver sitting here at the time of the explosion. As I said a minute before, where these guys were standing was where one of the fires was. He actually talked about he was walking back towards the truck when the minor explosion happened, so he didn't see it. He heard and felt it behind him, and that's when they suddenly got the hurry up. Between that minor explosion and the major explosion was between 1 to 2 minutes. So they were actually, as you saw, that rear fire truck was actually reversing at the time of the explosion. The other fire truck, they were actually, right at the moment of the explosion, they were all on the ground, and this is part of what saved their lives. They were all on the ground, putting the guy on the backboard, about to lift him up to put into that front fire truck. So if it was a minute earlier, we would have had at least 1 to 2 fatalities. If it was a minute later, that major explosion, 5 of those guys would have been in that front fire truck, and you saw the photo of it. We would have had some definitely fatalities in there as well. So in terms of timing, it was quite amazing that they survived. But that's the scene that we came up to. You can see the deforestation, you can see the damage to the bridge, the fire truck. Yeah, quite amazing. And if you hear from the police who responded to come and get those guys out, there's certainly some amazing stories of what happened. A lot of those guys from the fire services, from the police, have received awards for their bravery and their response in that situation. And you can imagine this was pitch black and dark. They couldn't see anything. Initially, the first police officer, he thought that everyone was dead, and he was just going down there to assess the scene and see what happened. And then he saw these guys stumbling in the dark, but didn't have a clue where they were or what had happened. So yeah, that's what we came to. This is where we started. This was day 2 of 10 days of doing the analysis and the scene selection, the scene review. So we went through and analysed and collected over 2,500 bits of gear from a 1 kilometre radius. So we actually got out and did the search pattern up and down and collected all that. GPS located, photographed, documented each piece, and took all that back to Helidon Explosives Reserve, where we set up a shed and were able to do the post-analysis on. We'll jump on. This is just the aerial, just showing you the damage. So this is where it rained, so the crater actually filled up with water pretty quickly after the rain. We lost a lot of data out of that, but we were able to still collect what we could from there. This is the disused rail bridge that runs. We didn't know at the time, but this is the 6th largest rail span bridge in Queensland. Heritage listed, built in 1875, I think it was 1895. Now no longer stands because basically the explosion took this off, stretched it out, and did a lot of damage. And we actually found bits of the bridge on this side of the crater. You can see the deforestation up to about 300 metres. All these trees gone. Some of these trees ended up 1.2 k's in various directions. So just the size of that explosion, quite massive. So I'll just run through the findings and what we found, major findings of the investigation. And again, this is on the web in more detail, and more than happy to talk about it if people want to know more details. The ammonium nitrate on board was actually for use on a mine site and blasting. The grade is UN 1942. It was actually it's porous, designed to absorb the diesel. It was within specification. The vehicle was sound, maintained. The vehicle contained a large amount of combustible material, and that's why it burnt for over an hour. The crash led to a spill of fuel, right across the site. There was a large fuel and certainly a large fuel fire. And the ammonium nitrate was contaminated with diesel fuels and metals, particularly zinc, copper, and aluminium. And if you know anything about ammonium nitrate, don't ever mix it with copper and zinc. It leads to a disaster, and certainly with a fire, it leads to an explosion, which is part of that pathway. So we went through the analysis and looked at the fire and what caused the fire, and then through to the explosion. We couldn't actually definitively determine the cause of fire. What we came up with is two possible scenarios. The first being leaking fuel that contacted the hot engine exhaust and ignited. So if you look here in these photos here, it's a bit hard to see with the size, but this is looking underneath the truck. To the rear, you can see the drive shaft running to the rear, fuel tanks either side. And you've got these lines that run between the two fuel tanks. Right up here is where all the electrics are. So the behind this fuel tank on the left-hand side is where they have the two. There's a 4 bank of batteries. You can see here. So up and top, so that's to run the ice pack and also to run the vehicle. They're in very close proximity to the fuel tanks. And this here is actually one of the starter motor circuits. So it runs from here. So up behind the fuel tank, it runs all the way up to the front of the vehicle and back again. We actually found that this had arced and had caused a lot of sparking in close proximity to where there was a lot of fuel. So the two possibilities we have with that is that this arc event with the fuel plus the fuel with the hot surfaces. So you actually got the exhausts that are running right in here next to the fuel tanks, the exhaust piping running through in close proximity as well. Definitely with the amount of fuel spill and with those two events, but we couldn't definitively determine which one had caused that fire. The cause of the first explosion, so I talked about this what we call the minor explosion. The guys on scene thought that was quite large until they saw the second one. It had no overpressure. It had certainly a fire and a lot of dust that basically got thrown up into the air. And they describe as this firework effect, which we think was burning aluminium coming back down, sprinkling down after the explosion. So the possible scenarios with that is that likely it could have been a tyre or air tank that had ruptured, but unlikely given the length of the fire. Quite possibly a thermal explosion that can happen with ammonium nitrate, or possibly the molten aluminium contacting that water, which first we didn't know the water was there underneath the bridge, but aluminium and water, or even molten ammonium nitrate with aluminium can cause a violent reaction, but not necessarily an explosion with an overpressure. The cause of the second explosion, again, we couldn't actually definitively determine, other than saying all the possible pathways that cause a major explosion with a detonation event. We couldn't actually narrow down, just there wasn't enough evidence. We do know that second explosion caused all of the damage to the infrastructure and the injuries to the people. On analysis, we came up with the people 50 metres away from that explosion had to have had an overpressure of less than 70 kilopascals. The only reason for that is that above 70 kilopascals is 100% fatality in the open. We only had one major shrapnel injury, and that was from one of the bystanders was holding the oxygen mask to the injured driver's head, or to his mouth and nose. A piece of shrapnel came through and took off some of his fingers and actually scalped the driver. Amazingly, again, an injury but no fatality. It's one of those things. And as I talked about before, that bank and the bridge actually provide a lot of protection to those people and save their lives. Recommendations out of the investigation, I won't go into these in a lot of detail, but these are in the report. The major focus is to look at the design criteria for ammonium nitrate vehicles, looking at how we can prevent and mitigate a fire. Part of that and one of the things we recommended is to put load protection between the load and the prime mover, or the wheels. The wheels and the prime mover is where your fuel sources are and where the fire's going to come. And looking at trying to reduce the combustible material as much as possible. If we can reduce the combustible material, we can reduce the length of and intensity of the fire, we can reduce the possibility of an explosion occurring. And then trying to segregate the fuels and the sources of ignition, trying to protect those, they're quite in close proximity. A lot of those truck designs are that way. You can try and provide some protection will help. We'll just jump on. The other aspect of the recommendations was emergency response and what we could do to improve the emergency response capability and how that's done. So a big thing around trying to get early initial incident notification and identification. So everyone was relying on, and as you do now when you come to an incident with a truck and dangerous goods or explosives, you rely on the driver being your first source of knowledge. Driver was taken out. You then go into the front of the vehicle and pull out the emergency information out of the inside pocket. That's burned to the ground. You've lost all that. You then rely on signage and all the other stuff that's on the vehicle. That's burning. You can't see it, and a lot of the signs have been lost in the crash. So looking at trying to step up the means of response. These vehicles are tracked for security purposes. So we're looking at using that tracking for emergency response purposes as well. And at the time, and what we have now is that the guy has a manual distress signal he can hit, and the vehicle's tracked, but it's not. There's no alert for loss of signal. There's no alert for deviation of route. So looking at trying to change the way that signal goes out, so that can be alerted to the company, potentially other agencies, that they can get that information and be able to have all the information of that vehicle, what's in that vehicle, who the company is, so that we can share that. We've changed the HAZChem code labelling. It was for ammonium nitrate only 1Z, which means didn't consider it being consider an explosion. So that's gone back to 1Y on the HAZChem code. So now it is consider an explosion. You'll see that on all the bags now. If you see them around, they should now be 1Y. We're now also in the space of looking at reviewing the pre-planning and the learning. So trying to put a package together with industry, with emergency services, and ourselves to share with the local communities, to share with the local fireys. These incidents in remote areas, they're all volunteer fireys. So they haven't got the same capability and information as the guys in the city and that sort of stuff do. So trying to get packs out for them and information out for them, and the local communities, so they've got knowledge. Talk about Charleville, talking to the local fires and police, they had no idea the quantities of dangerous goods and explosives that go through Charleville on a daily basis. Didn't realise the scale of what was going through there. And that's the first part of them being able to be planned and be ready for response of what you're going to expect. And there's some updates to the emergency response guide, which is going through now to basically look at that, and I'll go through that very briefly in a minute. So our implementation process, what we've done so far, I've talked a bit about that already. Where we're at now, there's been some changes to the emergency response information. We've got a safety alert out. You can jump on our website and grab. As I said, our report brief and the videos on the website. We've gone through with the National Transport Commission looking at updating the fire response gear on vehicles. So at the moment they have dry chem powder fire extinguisher. For a wheel bearing brake fire, dry chem powder extinguisher is about as useless as throwing yourself at it. We've gone through with them, and we've talked with industry, and 2 weeks ago we had a big National Working Party meeting, and we talked about the best response, and really dry chem powder with foam is the best combination. The dry chem to put the fire out, and the foam to get the heat out of your brakes, bearings and wheels. They seem to have a really good response with that, so we're looking at updating the Australian Dangerous Goods Code to reflect that for dangerous goods vehicles. Touched on the working party, so I'm chair of the National Working Party looking at ammonium nitrate vehicles and what we can do to improve, and the main focus around prevention or mitigation of fire. If we can stop the fire, then an explosion is never going to happen. The only possibility for an explosion happening is a sabotage event, where someone's actually deliberately trying to cause disruption. Which is still possible, but all of the incidents in the history is all from accidents, where there's been a prolonged, sustained fire leading to the explosion. So we've got the dangerous goods transporters, the regulators, the manufacturers, the experts, and the fireys on board through AFAC, and we're progressing that. Where we've got to now, on the next slide, is the 7 areas of focus that we're actually looking at. Is on the next slide there, is looking at having a shield between the cabin and the load. So providing a means of keeping the fire away from the load. Adding, and we require it in Queensland for our vehicles now, but adding it nationally for rollover protection and battery isolation on ammonium nitrate vehicles. So dangerous goods tankers require it, but ammonium nitrate doesn't. Looking at the wheel management, so putting on monitors to be able to look at temperature and pressure. You can pick up a hot tyre before it becomes a burning tyre and be able to deal with it. So I talked about putting these foam systems on and fire extinguishers to be able to deal adequately with the types of fires that happen. You know, electrical fires on dangerous goods vehicles about 45%, mechanical is about 55%. So having the adequate gear on the truck for that. Reducing the fire load, so looking at trying to decrease the amount of diesel, reduce any other combustibles on there. They use tarps to cover the load, trying to make them non-combustible tarps so that it doesn't spread the fire. Emergency response, as I touched on that already, changing the codes, updating, when to evacuate, when to fight a fire, and the distances as well. And that emergency response and security is kind of the same thing with the tracking and the alerts. And I've pretty much covered this already as I've jumped ahead, but basically, dealing with fire. If we can deal with the fire response and making sure people aren't there and they've got the information, and if you can get on early before the fire or before the fire hits the load, hit it adequately with your dry powder and your foam, you should never get that pathway going through any further. That's our aim. And I don't know if people are familiar or have seen these sort of systems, but these quickfires, a couple of our companies run these. Some of them have built their own systems. It's basically a foam setup that sits in behind the front here with a hose, and it's just air pressure. Hit the air pressure, you've got a 20-metre hose on it. You can get to the tyre on an angle and hit it with water. A bit more expensive than a foam fire extinguisher, but very effective. And the companies that run these have actually saved a couple of vehicles already from a major explosion or from a major fire that could possibly lead to an explosion. Plus, they've saved other trucks. So they've actually had another truck burning. They've pulled their vehicle up to, got their hose out, and they've actually dealt with it. Fantastic bit of technology. Very simple, very easy to build. And our aim is to have these on all heavy vehicles one day, if we can get to that point, or at least have all heavy vehicles carrying foam as well as dry powder. I've gone through wheel management. I won't really touch more on that. I've got to move on. And the emergency response guide, and more than happy to talk to people about what changes are in there and what impacts it might have as well. So that's me. Thank you very much for listening, guys.